How do I stop running out of things to say? I used to wonder that every time I embarrassed myself in conversation, which was pretty often. So I spent more than 8 years researching charisma, as one does. And today, I'm going to give you all of the most important things I learned about conversation during that time. First is a way to get rid of the pressure that you get when the conversational spotlight is on you. To start, you don't have to respond instantly. People are willing to wait so much longer than you'd think for your response. But during that time, you have to make it clear that you're thinking. Otherwise, they'll think that you're barely paying attention and you're just now remembering to respond 5 seconds later. You can show you're thinking by acting extra thoughtful with your body language, or you can show it with your words. You can stall for more time after you've started speaking too. All you have to do is speak slowly and use more pauses in between your words. When you do it well, it makes you seem more confident and it makes what you're saying much more impactful too. The final bonus of stalling is that you'll also have more time to remember and use the techniques that I'll teach you later. But even if you could stop time and think forever, you still won't be able to come up with the right thing to say if you're making this common mistake. But before I tell it to you, I want to ask you a question. What are some things that you should avoid saying to people? I mean, obviously, you don't want to constantly be negative or insult people or lie, but what else? Nope, that's it. When you're an overthinker, you believe that everything you want to say is either weird or dumb, but I promise you'll never find the perfect thing to say. So you have to just say what you're thinking and lower your filter. But not because you should always be talking. I'll explain more in a moment. But you should lower your filter because even if you can find the right words to make people like you, they're just gonna like an act. Now that may sound hypocritical coming from a guy who's about to tell you what to say, but I won't be giving you exact scripts. I'll give you processes for you to come up with what to say yourself. But as I said, you don't always need to be talking. Have you ever noticed that silences with family and friends are comfortable rather than awkward? Well, you can actually make silence feel like this with anyone, even people you just met. The only reason why silence is awkward when you aren't close to someone is because of the way that you think about the silence. It feels like every moment should be filled with words. But those comfortable moments with family and friends prove that silence doesn't need to be awkward. And I'm not saying it's easy, but if you change that belief and get comfortable with silence, it's so freeing to no longer feel the need to make conversation just to avoid awkwardness. But conversations are still very important. If you want to build deep connections or have fun and interesting discussions, then you need to know how to keep a conversation going. To start, I want to tell you two simple ways to come up with things to talk about, starting with the skill that 99% of people don't know about, which is crazy since it's the most important skill in conversation. A few years into researching charisma, I discovered that conversations are simply just two people connecting ideas, stories, and topics together. And I realized that if you knew how to create the links that connect ideas, you could not only talk forever, but you could also control the flow of conversation without anyone noticing. How easy would it be to talk if you could always bring the conversation to your favorite topics? Everyone's got that specific thing that they can talk about for days. Your conversations literally never have to be boring, because whenever a topic does become boring, you can just link to another one, like squeezing an orange till it's dry and then switching to a new one. Now, I haven't seen a name for this, so I called it linking. And I've found that the more linking methods that I know, the easier conversations are. And there are many linking methods, but I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm just going to show you two for today. First up is reminds me of. The way you do it is very simple. You just take whatever the other person said, then think about what it reminds you of. And it could remind you of literally anything. Just make sure you that use one of these phrases so the topic switch seems natural. If it seems like you're randomly switching topics, they'll feel like you aren't listening to them. Now, on to the next type of link, zooming. The way you do it is, you look at the topic that you're on, then either zoom out to a bigger one, or you can zoom in to a smaller one. And you don't need any of those phrases for this, because the topics are so closely related with this method. As a rule of thumb, you just need to leap from topic to topic to make sense to the other person. And while linking is great for switching topics, this next tool, observations, will give you something to say even if you aren't in conversation yet. I'll have a specific thing about starting conversations at the end of the video, but right now, I want to tell you about an observation technique that will get the other person to talk more without making them feel like they're at a job interview. I'll tell you exactly how to do it in a second, but you basically assume something about the other person. Then if you get it wrong, they'll correct you and explain. But if you're right, they'll think you're super smart and insightful. Then they'll talk more about what you assumed. So, to make an assumption, you first observe something about them. That could be the way they walk, their clothes, or something they said. Then think about what that could mean about them as a person. Like if they're really tall, you could say, "You must be great at basketball." Or if someone is talking about how much they like their friend, you could say, "You guys sound really close." It's really that simple. And with these two tools, you'll always be able to find something to talk about. Now, I want to go more into what to actually say, but if you already have something you want to say, like a story you want to tell your friend, or a question you've been wanting to ask them, you can just bring it up. Here are some examples on how you can do that. And it's not bad to start conversations, but don't use it during conversation too much because it can feel unnatural. But what if you don't already have something that you want to say? Well, I've divided literally everything you can say up into 3 categories: adding, prompting, and shaping. Shaping is pretty advanced though, so I'll save that for another video. But right now, I'll start with adding. There are a lot of ways that you can add, but first I want to give you the go-to technique that improv comedians use to come up with entire plays from the top of their head. The technique is called yes and. The way to do it is simply agree with what the other person said and then add on to it. But what do you add? Well, first of all, you have to add something new. A very common mistake is basically saying what the other person said, just with different words. This just makes it harder on the other person and generally leads to boring conversations. But it's pretty easy to make sure that what you're adding is new and interesting though. And if you look on screen, here's a list of the types of things you can add to a conversation. The most important thing on this list is stories. Our brains are wired for stories, and humans have been telling them since we were cavemen sitting around fires. Stories can hold our attention for hours, and a good one will make a stranger feel like they've known you for their whole life. And they don't have to be about crazy times that you've almost died in order for them to be interesting either. If you know the rules of storytelling, then you can turn everyday moments into stories that people want to listen to. I'm definitely making an in-depth video about storytelling at some point, but for now, here are 2 aspects of storytelling that you need to have in your stories. First is conflict. This could be as simple as, "I want this, but it's hard to get because of this reason." This creates a constant tension that makes people want to know what happens next. No one wants to hear a story about how you got what you wanted instantly with zero struggle. But once you're holding their attention with conflict, you have to avoid losing it with the second aspect, plot. In basic terms, plot is how you structure a bunch of random events into a story, and without it, your story will be confusing, causing people to tune out. When you tell a story, you're making a path for listeners to follow, and if you forget a section, then they'll fall off, and it's really hard to get them back on. Having even basic conflict and plot is enough to make your bad stories interesting. And since you now know some of what you can say in conversation, I think it's time to give you a rough guide on how much you should talk versus how much you should listen. Because we've all met that person who just never stops talking. Those people just make it seem like they only care about themselves. But on the other hand, if they keep asking questions over and over, it starts to feel like an interview. Or does it? That interview feeling only happens when questions feel like they're pre-selected. For example, what's your favorite color? Oh, same. What's one thing you're grateful for? Cool. What's one thing you want to do in life? Of course that's going to feel like an interview, but if the questions you're asking make sense to the flow of conversation and they're good questions, people love them. I'll tell you how to do both in a second, but the point is, everyone's favorite subject is themselves, and you can't deny it. If your favorite activity is baking, I sincerely doubt that you'll hate talking about baking. Now, given that fact, I suggest you aim for about 30 to 50% talking and listen for the rest of the time. Some people aren't as talkative though, So if you want to keep a conversation going, you'll have to fill in whatever silences that they leave. But there are ways to get the other person to talk more, which leads me to the second type of thing that you can say, prompts. I've already taught you one prompting technique, assumptions. Now I want to get into another one of the main prompting techniques, questions, and more importantly, how to ask a good one. First, you want your questions to make sense to the flow of conversation. One way to do that is to use linking and observations to think of questions. Another way to think of natural questions is to listen. When someone makes a statement, they don't give you all the information. They leave out details. These are like loose threads, and it would make sense for you to ask a question about one of them. The second part of a good question is that they're easy to answer. A lot of people say you should ask open-ended questions. And they're kinda right. If you ask a question where their options are yes or no, obviously the conversation is going to be dry. But if you ask a question that's too open, like, what's your story? 95% of people will say, what do you mean? Sadly, I can't tell you exactly how open every single question should be. So I would first make sure that the question isn't a yes or no, and then just ask it. Then, if they ask what you mean, you can either make the question more specific or give them an example. You can also make it easier for the other person to talk by using active listening. Asking questions is a part of that, but you also want to make it unmistakably obvious that you're listening to them while they're talking too. Because if it seems like you aren't listening, they'll likely get discouraged and stop talking. So, I want to quickly run you through a few ways to show that you are listening. One way is with your body language, like making eye contact. Communication experts agree that you should make eye contact 70% of the time while you're listening. So, 7 seconds of eye contact and 3 seconds of letting your eyes wander. It's also good practice to slowly nod and squint your eyes slightly to show that you're trying to understand them. You can also show that you're listening verbally with interjections. Things like, yeah. Okay. There are also a few special questions that you can ask that show that you're listening too. For the first, you summarize what they just said in the form of a question. You can also just repeat the last few words that they said in the form of a question to get them to explain more. But don't let doing all this get in the way of actually listening. If you're truly listening, most of this should just happen automatically. And you need to listen to be able to find the best topics. Since everyone is interested in different things, there is no best topic for everyone. The best topic depends on what you and the other person in the conversation are interested in. And if you find a topic that you're both really interested in, congrats. That's your new best friend. But in order to find a topic that you're both interested in, obviously you need to be able to tell when they're excited to talk about something. So here are a few signs to look for. When their tone of voice fluctuates a lot, when they speak louder, and when they talk about a topic for longer than they do with others. So while you're talking about various topics, pay attention to these signs. The bonus of this is even if you don't know much about the topic that they're interested in, you can literally just ask questions and have them teach you about it. People love to feel important and interesting, so not only will they love you for it, you'll also learn some really interesting things. And if you want to find one that you're both interested in, it's basically a process of elimination. You bring the conversation to a topic that you're interested in, then you can use the signs that I told you about to check if they're interested too. If not, then it's on to the next, and then the next, until you find one. But you can speed this process up with a technique called threading. Remember how I said that with every statement someone says, there are dozens of threads that you can pull on? Well, it works the other way around too. If you add more details to your statements, this covers more ground in the topic that you're passionate about. And people will naturally go deeper into the topic that they're most interested in, allowing them to do the work for you, finding the common interest themselves. And once you find a topic that one or both of you are interested in, you can bring it up whenever you have a conversation with that person. But in order to actually use everything I've taught you today, you need to know how to start a conversation. I want to give you a step-by-step process to start conversations with anybody, no matter the situation. All you have to do is click the link at the top of the description to get it.